will begin. Good evening, everybody. The hour being after 6 o'clock, I would like to call the February 23rd, 2021 School Building Committee meeting to order, if I could. And if I could read a statement here, per Governor Baker's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, the public will not be allowed to physically access this school building committee meeting. Members of the public will be able to view this meeting on Walpole Media Cable Access the following day. Citizens with a question or comment should email mmortali@walpole.k12.ma.us. We will do our best to get back to you with an answer as soon as possible. All votes taken by the school building committee in remote participation are done via the roll call vote. So with that, I would like to take up item number 3 on the agenda, approval of prior meeting minutes from January 26th, 2021.
I'd make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, Ms. Gallivan, and I believe we have Mr. Conroy spoke. Mr. Conroy.
No, that was me, Mark. Jack Fisher.
Okay, Mr. Fisher, I'm sorry.
Well, Nancy made the motion before I could, so you need to get a second, and then we'll have a discussion.
Correct. So is that a second?
No.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second for Mr. Senek. And do we have discussion? Mr. Conroy, did you have anything to say? Pardon me, Mr. Fisher.
Yes, as you know, Mark, several of us exchanged some emails yesterday about the minutes, and there was some concern. There were some things that significant things that needed to be added to it. Basically, to have 3 summary sentences describing an hour and a half of discussion at our last meeting, which also included discussion of 2 hours worth of meetings for the joint meeting with the Sewer and Water Commission. So I made some specific suggestions on things to be added. I think there were some other folks that had called about some errors and some amendments. So what I would suggest is that what we do is we delay consideration and approval of these minutes until the updates can be made, and we take that up at the next meeting.
Very good. So would you like to make what's the word, a replacement motion or substitute motion? Substitute motion.
Yeah. So I'll make a substitute motion to delay consideration of the minutes from the last meeting until they're amended, and we can vote it at a later time.
So very good. We have a substitute motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. We have a motion for Mr. Fisher, a second for Mr. Conroy. Any questions or discussion? So we have a motion.
Do we have all those comments now?
Yes. Yes, we do.
As far as goes, so do you want to go through them so we can be in agreement, or?
I'll add to them. Basically, I gave you 4 bullet points on things I think needed to be added. A couple of other folks had identified a couple of errors. And so, as I said, just to summarize it, I mean, we talked an hour and a half and we had 3 summary sentences. And so what I did in my email to you is I gave you 4 bullet points that I think we need to be covered. And I think that's a good starting place to where to go to, and we'll have to take a look at it. But there is some, things like, you need to include as part of the minutes as an attachment the handouts that came from Sewer and Water as the maps and things like that. Those kinds of things have to be there. People came up with some valid points as far as the ratings were concerned. Those points need to be put in there, and I call that out. So those are the types of things, Brian. I'll be happy to work with you on those if you want.
Yeah, just as long as we have the full list, so we can work with Mary to get them updated with whatever the comments were. Tony, we have all the comments, even the ones not from Jack.
I do have Jack's comments, and the minutes were corrected regarding the last vote of 11-4 regarding preferred schematic. So those have already been amended.
Are there any other comments from the committee members? I mean, typically what we'll do, Jack, is at a meeting like this, we'll actually collect anyone's comments and then we can amend them.
That's fine.
So, very good. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none,
This is
I'd
on
like
the
to take...
substitute this is on the substitute motion,
This
right?
is on the substitute motion, correct, Mr. Fisher?
Thank
So we have a motion and a second for the substitute motion. I'm going to poll the committee. So if you're in favor of this, you're in favor of amending the minutes and considering them at our next meeting. Mr. Fisher?
Yes.
Very good. Mr. Salvatore?
Yes.
Ms. Lawson?
Yes.
Ms. Gallivan?
Yes.
Ms. Gaositz?
Yes.
Dr. Goff?
Yes.
Mr. Anderson?
Yeah.
Mr. Conroy?
Yes.
Mr. Jeffrey Fisher? Mr. John Fisher?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Hahn?
Yes.
Mr. Senek?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago Taylor?
Yes.
And I vote yes. I believe that's everyone. Did I miss anybody? Very good. It is a vote. So our third item, and I will turn this over to Brian Jarvis, is to review and approve the vendor invoice package from January 2021.
I can quickly go
Tony's
through
gonna go
this.
through
Mr.
Yeah.
Pena, thank you.
No problem. We had 2 invoices in January, one for Compass and one for TAPE. That's going to continue to be a trend. Compass invoice includes 5 weeks of time, which included the last week of December. The TAPE invoice has been pretty standard through feasibility study. The total of the 2 invoices is $60,335. Those are the invoices we're looking to get approved tonight. On the total project budget update, as everyone knows, there's 1.5 million. 1.229 million has been committed. This went up a tiny bit to cover the last amendment that we voted on, which was just to incorporate the geotech and the environmental at Johnson. So to date, that's what's been committed. We're about 1/3 of the way through paying out on the 1.229 with a balance to pay out of 810,000. So 270,000 left in the total project budget, uncommitted for anything that comes up. So that's kind of a snapshot of where we are. These are the invoices if someone wants to entertain a motion for approval of CPM 8212 and TAPE 210104 in the amount of 60,335.
Thank you, Mr. Pena. Do we have any questions? Hearing none, I'd like to take a motion to approve the vendor invoice packages as listed in your packet.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion from Mr. Jeffrey Fisher. Do we have a second?
Second.
A second, I believe, from Ms. Gaositz. So once again, I'm going to poll the committee. Mr. Fisher?
Yes.
Mr. Salvatore?
Aye.
Ms. Lawson?
Yes.
Ms. Gallivan?
Yes.
Ms. Gaositz?
Yes.
Dr. Goff?
Yes.
Mr. Anderson?
Yeah.
Mr. Conroy?
Yes.
Mr. Jeffrey Fisher?
Yes.
Mr. John Fisher? Mr. John Fisher? Mr. Connor?
Sorry, yes.
Okay, Mr. Fisher, that's a yes. Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Hahn?
Yes.
Mr. Senek?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago Taylor?
Yes.
And I vote yes, and I don't believe I left anybody out. It is a vote. Item number 5 on our agenda is the feasibility study, the preferred schematic report discussion. And again, either Mr. Pena or Mr. Jarvis, if you want to take over here.
We're gonna turn this over to TAPE. This is a review of the draft PSR document. I sent out a link on Saturday morning with the complete document, and so TAPE is gonna take us through in a similar way that we did in the PDP. So I'll hand that over to Chris and Charlie.
Yeah, and the objective for tonight is the PSR submission to the MSBA. The goal was to have that submitted to them at some point tomorrow to get that in by the end of the month. And that'll get us lined up for next steps with the MSBA, which is the Facilities Assessment Committee meeting, which is currently on the calendar for either March 10th or March 24th. So the goal tonight would be to vote the PSR submission to go into MSBA after we have a chance to review it.
Okay.
With that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Tony. So really, the month of February has been trying to get the PSR in order and get it ready to submit to the MSBA, as Brian and Tony have just mentioned. So what we wanted to do tonight is just, again, last time we gave you a little bit of a review, and really it's an overview of the document. As Tony mentioned, you should have had access to a link where you could go through and peruse most of this document in its in really its final form. The only things that have been updated in the last 24 to 48 hours have been the educational program and a traffic study, and then a few documents that always come right at the end, which are in the tail end of the submittal. But on this page, we're just highlighting the sections that go into it, and a lot of this you've seen or have been a part of through the process. And the image on the right is just that evaluation matrix where we went through and really kind of tossed through all of the options and got down to the preferred option of B1. And that's really in section 3.3 and kind of highlights the process of that, and that's really what we wanted to show there, is just give you a glimpse of that. And then you can go to the next slide, Tony. And then the image on this page, these are images from the ED program, which was updated yesterday. And what we do is we go through and make diagrams that highlight how the building design works in relationship to the educational program. And so the top left image is one that just kind of talks about the building's ability to be cordoned off into a public and academic type of building, where effectively you have a door separation between the two, and you can have events on the public side, and the whole rest of the school can be locked out at night, or however that works. Maybe it's a voting scenario, and you want to keep this school secure and have voting in gym or open space or something. And then the three academic neighborhoods are highlighted there with the organizing principle of that central spine. And the one on the right is talking about the relationship of the gym to the first floor and how you access that off of the second floor lobby. And then the one on the bottom is a diagram that shows how the SPED program stacks, kind of creating these little pillars that go through literally through all three floors, and help organize the SPED and distribute it actually equally throughout the program and throughout the building. And so those you find in the educational summary, educational program, which is 4.2, and they're just embedded in line with the educational program and where we talk about design responses. So they're kind of fun. They help highlight the building. They help talk about how it's designed and how it responds to the ed program, which is very important for the MSBA, and then also any community members that may wonder why certain things are the way they are. So we can go to the next slide, Tony. So then we have the B1 option, and you should have seen these as well. These are kind of the updates for the B1 option, left to right. You can read there, first, second, and third floor. The classroom wings, which is on the southern side of the building, stack perfectly. And then you have the public side of the building, which is the auditorium and gym, and the media actually on the second floor, which could host meetings and different kinds of events. So you can kind of see how it's laid out here, and that is the current thinking of B1, how we've been pushing and pulling on the program to make it fit in the location that this committee had voted on previously. And we think we've made a lot of headway in that regard. So you can go to the next slide. So these next 3 slides, I believe, are all the same floor plans, just a little bit more zoomed in, and one floor per slide. And you can just see a little bit more detail on how we're thinking in terms of administration, or, you know, the auditorium and the band and the relates to the auditorium next to it. And again, how some of the classroom wings lay out with the flexible breakout spaces in between the classrooms, and you know, all of that kind of stuff. This is all the sort of nuts and bolts, how the plan comes together. So we can go quickly through this. The second floor, the big difference here is the gym is on the second floor. We did rifle through some options where we had a kitchen that was below the gym, but the gym was on the first floor, and because of grading, that would work out. But through conversations with the district and the food service provider, it was preferred that the kitchen be on the same floor as the cafeteria, the main central kitchen. So we went back to a gym on the second floor, kind of alternative, and go to the third. And then the third floor is the rest of the program, and mainly it's just the classroom wing up here on the third floor. And the taller space is open to below, which is the auditorium, gym, and media center. So you can go to the next slide. So we wanted to make sure we highlight to this group that there are some overages in the program. And we've talked about this before at the PDP. It's the same story here at the PSR. A lot of these are exactly the same as what we went into the PDP with. But it's very important to highlight these because they have a potential, many of them have a potential to be deemed ineligible by the MSBA and therefore outside of the grant, which means the district would pay 100% of the cost for those. A prime example of that is the auditorium and stage in this scenario. If you build a separate auditorium, you have to take the stage out as well, and so the MSBA deems all of that ineligible. And there's probably a few others in there that they deem ineligible as well. And so there's quite a bit of extra square footage, I should say, and maybe extra is not a great term for it, but there's quite a bit of square footage that is over the MSBA's template, but this is all matched to the educational program and what the district has mentioned and talked about that they wanted, as we've done all of the working group meetings and development of the PDP and PSR to this point. And so you can go to the next slide. Just to compare how these things relate, the PDP, we went that submission at a gross square footage of 173,818 square feet. And the PSR, we've been able to reduce that by around 3,000 square feet. And the main mechanism for that was, you see the bullet points there, the prep rooms, chemical storage, self-contained sped rooms, principal's office and teacher's lounge and workroom. And that's just the effort of taking a hard look at a lot of these spaces and really thinking, you know, sharpening the pencil, thinking about their function and their and carving out square footage. So that's the best way to get the cost down, is to carve out the square footage. You can go to the next slide.
Hey, Chris, can you just recap the major 3 items here that are creating the overage for committee members?
Yeah, it's the auditorium is 6,000 square feet. That's not in the MSBA's template at all. And the central kitchen, which is 5,000, I think we're carrying 5,800 square feet right now versus the 2,200 square feet that the MSBA provides. So that's about 3,500 square feet over. And then the gymnasium, which is in the MSBA's template, is 6,000 square feet. And we're carrying 9,000 to get the third teaching station in there, knowing that the district would be going from 2 full-size gyms to effectively 1.5 gyms in the new bird scenario.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
So part of the process for the MSBA, and actually in their comments from the PDP phase, was that they asked us to investigate cafetorium alternative. And that's, you know, if you're not familiar, that's a fancy way to say, put a stage on a side or around the cafeteria, and then you can set up seating there and have performances on the stage. It's very kind of typical of a lot of elementary schools and middle schools too, somewhat. But they asked us to investigate that, and so we did a layout and investigated that alternative. And again, it was because the MSBA required it, and that's why we did this, and it's in the PSR. Go to the next slide. So one of the things that we're going to continue to look at as we go from PSR to the schematic design phase is to keep looking at ways to reduce the square footage. And some of those things, and these are just question marks, these have not been confirmed or vetted by anybody right now. This is just, you know, the project professionals taking a look at it and throwing things out there that could be possibilities. So, you know, maybe general classrooms could shrink. That's going to be an education decision from the district. You could maybe reduce the number of tech classrooms. You could make the centralized kitchen smaller, or, you know, even rethink the need for the centralized kitchen at the school, just to be sure that we're on the right track. We could look at reduction in gym space, or even in the number of music classrooms. The MSBA only provides one music classroom in their template, and we're asking for 3. And in that scenario, you'd use the stage as one of the classrooms, potentially, and maybe rethink the idea of a dedicated auditorium. This goes back to the cafeteria or cafetorium idea that the MSBA made us look at, or, you know, if we are going to keep an auditorium, which sounds like a very positive thing for the town of Walpole, maybe we look at the size of it and maybe we can reduce the size. Currently, we're planning it for about 600 seats, and so maybe there's a possibility to revise and relook at that. So you can go to the next slide. So one of the key things for the preferred schematic is to really start to think about how this building could be built and think about logistics and phasing and all of that. And so we have 4 different phases, I guess, here that we wanted to highlight. And these are logistical phasing diagrams that we worked on. And the first phase we're calling enabling phase, because we really think that you need to build the road that goes out to East Street, and that would become the bus exit and construction entrance only. And so you can see that buses would come in from Washington Street, come through the site, and then circle around to the back of the building, and they would have a dedicated drop-off on the back side of the building. And then the cars would loop around at the front entry and return back out to Washington Street for leaving. And then there's a temporary parking lot in that area just south of that newly aligned main road. That allows us to get the construction fence in, which is that blue aqua color line, and really section off a big chunk of area for the construction to happen and build the entire new building at that point. You can go to the next slide. And so the next phase is the construction phase. It looks similar to the enabling phase, but in this scenario, we've just added in the layer of the building, and so the building itself, so you can kind of see where it goes and how it fits and how everything can co-locate. It is tight, but you know, we've done tighter. And managed that well and had egress and safety for everybody. So this is just a look at how that would happen during construction. And again, I just talked about the bus bypass loop and the student card, the drop off for students coming by car. And then, you know, looking at the different areas for contractor laydowns and stuff like that. And so then during construction, there's, after the building's built, you can go to the next slide, Tony. After the building's built and opened, there's a short phase. It's not terribly long, but it does take a few months, and that'll be the phase of demolishing the existing Bird building. And so there will continue to be the access road out to East Street that allows for construction traffic to come and go and take off the debris. And one of the good things we've done with the building has been able to push and pull on it in a way that got the service area much larger than it used to be. So the diagram there shows buses being able to turn a loop all in that area where you can come back and do final paving once the rest of the site is done. But you can see similar site diagram and path for as the construction phase. The only difference is buses would enter and exit out of the East Street side, and cars would enter and exit out of Washington Street. And that completely separates the two traffic scenarios. Go to the next slide. And then you have the final completion, and this is the most current final rendering for the site plan, and just showing the parking and the buses still separate from the cars, and the service loading area that can accommodate the large size trucks and enough room to turn around and back up and all of that stuff. And then the access road going around the entire building with enough separation to satisfy all codes. And then the thing I haven't mentioned yet is part of that enabling phase, we would actually widen the entry road from Washington Street from 2 lanes to 3 lanes, basically. And that would be two lanes in, 1 lane out, and that allows for cars to queue on the right-hand side, and then buses to still get by, or emergency vehicles. I'll go to the next slide. Is this still me, or is this Brian?
I think this will be Brian, but does anyone wanna ask
Want to go back and take a break there? Yeah.
Yeah, or comments on any of the...
If not, we can go through everything and take questions at the end.
Keep going?
I just got one question, and that's the proposal on the 600-seat auditorium. How does that compare to our existing sites like Walpole High or JMS?
So you go back to the space summary, and you might be able to see that number. So on the, Chris, you want to explain that?
We don't have Walpole High. If that's the question, you want to know how big Walpole High is. See how big the Johnson, actually, I don't know if I know capacity, I know square footage. The Johnson's 4,600 square feet, and the Bird is just over 2,800 square feet. And we're planning for 6,000 square feet right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments or anything related to the E1 concept?
Yeah, I had a question. Tony, this is Boris.
Yep.
Question regarding the along Jeffrey Fisher's comments regarding the auditorium. Since the school is being built to front 900 students, is 600 sufficient enough for another auditorium?
600 will hold 2 full grades at one time.
Yeah, the thinking now, Boris, is that you'd have a grade or something possibly performing, or you'd schedule 2 grades to attend a performance, or you'd have a grade that was putting on a performance and be able to get 2 people from the household in the audience. That's the current thinking, but obviously that's something that can be revisited.
If I could add something, I have a figure in my mind. There's a close friend of mine at school is the technical theater. He's the theater director, technical theater and theater production. I seem to recall in conversation with him, this is the old MSBA standard, or the old theater standard, that you wanted to be able to fit half your student body in the auditorium at once. So I don't know if that rings familiar with you, Brian, or anybody, but or Chris, but
The
the old MSBA, the MSBA standard for a high school auditorium is 3/4 of the population up to a maximum of like 720.
Okay,
But they only have a high school standard right now.
right, right.
So the 600 fits that need.
Yeah, the 600 is what we described as getting 2 classes in at once, or a class with 2 people from home in the audience. In theory.
I think Alice had a question.
I have a question about the, on a previous slide, about the teachers, room being, I don't know, okay, elimination of separate teachers' lounge workroom, what does that mean?
So in the space summary, when we, every new phase of the project, we kind of go through with a fine-tooth comb and try to find the things that we might have overlooked previously. And the space summary had, it had a line item for a staff lunchroom where the staff could go and eat lunch. And then it also had a separate line item for this program item that's called Teachers Lounge and Workroom. Well, up above the lines, we added, because of the the educational program, we made actually dedicated teacher planning rooms for each grade. So there's one on each floor. And so in review with the district, we said eliminating this sort of separate centralized lounge and going with 3 separate spaces makes sense, and it still keeps the staff lunchroom intact, so they can go there and have lunch. But then it gives them 3 rooms to go do teacher planning, 1 per grade.
Okay, thank you.
And if I might add, Alice, I hate to keep chiming in. It's luxury living if you're a teacher compared to Bert or Johnson now. And especially if you're a teacher that doesn't have your own classroom. You've got, from my point of view, ample prep space.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question.
Questions or comments?
Mr. Conroy.
Yes. Since Bird is the site, traffic study, how is that coming along? Meaning, why don't we just hit it right where it belongs? Is you have a light at Washington High Plain. In the morning, if it's anything like the high school, they'll be backed out all the way down the East Street. That's the only way to take a left. Coming out in the afternoon with parent pickup, I would say probably better than 70% of your traffic is going to want to take a right onto Washington coming out of the school. That needs to be looked at for queuing and everything else, because that's a very short space from the driveway to the intersection. And even in the morning, it's during drive time. Afternoon, it's not as bad because, it's not everybody getting out of work, but you got to look at both of them. One's at prime time in the morning, trying to take a left, and the other one is coming out of the school in the afternoon, taking a right. So I don't know I don't think you guys have got to that point yet, but that's going to be a big consideration.
Yeah, Chris,
Do
do
you want to cover the highlights of the traffic report that we received just recently?
We received it this morning, so we've not had a chance to really vet it. But the traffic report does say that there are going to be some intersections that will have a worse condition than they have now. And they say that it will typically be in the morning, not the afternoon, I think. And I think what we've asked the traffic consultant to do is be prepared to make a presentation. And okay. You can select who it should be made to. We presume it would be made to this entire committee, but to explain their findings. But I don't think we're in a position right now to summarize. There's a lot of intersections in this study. I think they're comfortable with the on-site improvements in plan. I don't think there are any issues there whatsoever, but I do think that it's true that there are some intersections that will be further stressed by the traffic.
Okay, I understand that. I know how traffic goes. Been doing a long, long time. But what needs to be focused is coming out of the school at 3:30, trying to take a right. That light's going to be red, and you're going to have a queuing problem. Now, they can't do a traffic study on that because it doesn't exist now. That's what needs to be understood when you do this presentation is, do you have enough queuing with people getting backed up, waiting to get out for that light to turn green? That's...
So as Chris mentioned, the intention here is to have the driveway be a 3-lane driveway. And part of that would be so that there could be dedicated left-hand and right-hand turns, aisles at the intersection between the school driveway and Washington Street. So that will allow queuing, but I think the bigger question you may be asking is how big is the queue going to be?
Well, as I said before, I'm going to guess less than 30% is going to take a left. And I guess 70% of the town is to the right. So the left-hand lane doesn't help that much. All I'm saying, I'm forewarning that needs to really be looked at, because you could really have an issue because of light not moving. That's all.
Yeah, we'll keep our eyes on that. Thank you, Jack.
Mark, I think Jeff has his hand up.
Yeah, I can't, pardon me, everybody. I can't see any more screen than you can. So Jeff, if you had a question or comment?
It's on top of Jack's, and it has to go to the comparison slide where we have BR2, B1, and the Johnson site. I'd like to see the classification for the traffic conditions, level set between Johnson and the Bird site. I understand there's been a lot of concern about the introduction of additional traffic issues with the Bird site, but it's currently showing as solid green.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Anybody else?
Yes, if I may.
Mr. Salvatore.
I have a meeting at 7, and this may be a little not the perfect time for it, but I thought it was a good. What happened? We did a straw vote, and the preferred location was Johnson, and then we did a there was some machinations in the background, and including having the sewer and water come in and opine, and the Bird site became the preferred site. But when we had the first straw vote that made Johnson the preferred site, we were looking at the location of the building being on the field space. But when we came back, the building was between the current Bird site and Washington Street. What happened to that other plan that had the building placed on the field site, and on whose suggestion was it placed between the building and the current building and Washington Street? I know we had seen plans that required phasing in that the sites overlapped. I don't remember seeing one, this plan prior to that. I'd just like to hear how that occurred.
If I could, Mr. Salvatore, and I'll open this up to anybody else. I seem to recall a building roughly on this spot, a building on the field, and the Johnson site being sort of on the list to begin with. If anybody else wants to correct me, please chime in.
But my recollection was that the one approximately on this site required part of the building to be demolished for the building to be completed.
There was another option like that, a staged option. I want to say it was B4. But what ended up happening is the field option did make it to the consolidated list, and then the committee voted on the 5th for a short list of January, and that field option did not make it on the short list. The short list included, and this was a vote of the committee, one of the Johnson options, which we call J2, this B1 option, which is not a field option and not a staged option, and then the ad reno, mostly because that one's required by MSBA to be pursued. So the field option did not actually make it to the consolidated short list that was considered.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question on that line.
Yes, Mr. Conroy.
Yeah, I understand what Dave said, and it did pop in the back. Seems like it's like we have no room to the left, but we got plenty of room to the right, and we're digging in the hills. My opinion, and it's from what I do, this is way more expensive than building on the fields. It's obvious that if it was built on the fields, there would be no disruption to the current school. Everything would be built out front. I think we need some numbers on that just to tell us what the difference in the price would be, but also the fact that you would not disrupt anybody, any kid in the school during this time frame. It'd be built out in front. You put a fence right at the top of the slope of the hill by the baseball field, and that goes on, and kids continue on like they've been doing for the last 60 years in the back. Has that been given any consideration?
Yes, I'll answer that. Yes, the field option was considered. It was called B6. It had a cost estimate associated with it, and this committee specifically voted to not go that route because of the cost to rebuild fields.
Oh, time out. Let's stop. The fields are cheap. Please, I don't want anybody arguing me on what things cost. Fields are cheap. We have more than enough fields in this town. But the fact is, no one's going to convince me, and I'm going to say, you guys from the architects don't know me, but this is my business, that you can't dig into a hill for less money than doing it out front. But the fact is that you're going to disrupt the entire operation of Byrd Middle School for 3.5 years, and that building on a flat field. And also, as I said before, there is no, let's get down to brass tacks. There is no requirement for middle schools to have fields. We all know that. I asked that last time and no one could answer it. So we're just trying to keep a field alive for no other reason than it's there. We just built $10 million worth of fields up by the prison, including full-size baseball fields. So that's what's really bothersome to me. As a building committee member, my job is to get what you want for the most economical price, not what you would like to have. And I don't see that happening here. And to sacrifice the field, once again, SBAB or whatever they're called now does not have a requirement, as was said before, for fields. So we're keeping a baseball field and soccer fields for the fact that it's definitely cheaper if you get rid of the cost to rebuild the fields, because you don't need to necessarily do that. And the fact that from a building standpoint, put up the fence and they go happily ever after. This would be just like Johnson up on the top of the hill. Doesn't affect them. I would like to see, get rid of the field cost, but I'd like to see what the difference is in that, and also that people got to start weighing in what the interruption will be and what that's all worth to the schools and the kids going there. And still needs it. You wanted it Byrd, but it's not in the right place. So if you could carve out the cost to get rid of the fields, because there's nothing that says with a gun to our head we have to rebuild that. Okay. So, and oh, by the way, I just want to, for everybody, for some reason cable went out, so we're not on TV. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conroy. Anybody else?
I think Alice has her hands up.
All right, thank Ms. Lawson.
So I've been at every meeting, and I recall we specifically voted to, I have on my yes column J2, B1, and B5, and in my no column B6, BR1, BR2, B4. Afterwards, when we had more information about the situation at the site, the Johnson site, at our next meeting, we voted again, and we voted for B1. And the numbers were 11-4. So I don't understand what we're doing right now. I think we're supposed to keep moving ahead, and I think we can rework this and revote and reconfigure, and we can be doing this for 5 years. I did consider the things, Jack, that you mentioned, and I felt strongly about this particular concept, B1, and apparently 10 other people did too. So it may not be what you would have chosen, but that's what the majority chose. So I think that we're supposed to be operating under democratic principles, and I think the majority has spoken, and we're going with B1.
I'd like to comment to that.
Yes, Mr. Conroy.
Very simple. I've been on the building committee since 1988. Our job has been to bring in what the school needed at the least minimal cost, not what people thought was what they liked. And as we know, Johnson's the cheapest. I believe out front is the second. So as far as the votes, fine. But you got to remember, three of us, the two Fishers and myself, this is what we do. We don't get into what we like or not. You tell us what you need, we're going to do it. And that needed to be looked at, but I guess, you said that's the vote. I understand the vote, but I am just saying, I'll just bring it up that I would like to see it. I don't think it's a big deal just for someone to tell me if we didn't have the fields, what the cost is. Because guess what? Someone's going to ask that down the road, believe me.
Thank you, Mr. Conroy. Anybody else?
Again, I don't think I want to get into the argument of what the vote was. I do think that one of the things that I feel that we're missing is thinking about what's going to be best in 20 years. We keep talking about the cheapest and the quickest. Well, we also need to think about in 20 years, we might need the field, and we need the field right now. It needs for physical education. So the top of talking about the office or the space for teachers, it will be great now, but in 20 years it might not be great because it might be obsolete. So that is the part that I want to make sure that we address. Physical education in the field is needed, and we should not be focusing on what's cheapest to do it now and what we meet the state, because we need to do better than what the state requires, and we have the opportunity to do better now.
Thank you, Ms. Santiago-Taylor. Anybody else? And keep in mind, I can't see you, so please just speak up.
Jack and Boris have their hands up.
Okay. So, Mr. Fisher, please.
Just a quick comment here. I understand that the committee voted to proceed with not building or not having as an alternative the bird sighting on the fields. However, I think all Jack is asking for, and I think it's important, and it's going to be asked, is what's the real cost? What's the cost savings if we go ahead and build it down front? Because we do not have a requirement to have the fields, and if we sited it at the other location, we wouldn't have the fields be able to do anything with the fields anyway. So all we're asking for is to just come up with a comparative cost, just as Jack is asking. And if it's a significant difference, then we may want to reconsider the siting of that building on the bird site. But I think we need to have that cost because, and I'll add this one thing. We talked probably, I'd say, a good hour between 2 or 3 meetings on whether we needed this, whether we needed a field, whether we didn't need a field, where it should be, and so forth like that. But it's very advantageous to go ahead from a logistics perspective and a transition perspective to have it down at the front, and it's less disruptive. So, but that aside, I think all Jack is asking for is let's get real numbers associated with, is there a cost savings with locating the building on the fields? That's all. That's all we're asking for, Brian. And I'd ask you guys to go ahead and come up with that.
Brian, we do have those numbers.
Yeah, we have that. I can share.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you see that?
No.
Oh, there we go. So this is what we had gone through at prior meetings where we looked at all the different options that were consolidated down to the 6. BR2, the renovation, B1, which we're talking about now, which was shown in that location. B4, that was the phase project, building the gym or an auditorium after the tear down of Bird. B5, which was perpendicular to Washington Street, kind of into the grading of that hill, building partially on the field to maintain a field at a minimum, and then the Johnson option. We had done preliminary cost estimates with site work associated with those, phasing and logistics associated with those, and then construction costs for total construction value. And they were all relatively close at the end of the day. And then for the field option, we were carrying a replacement cost to replace fields at $3 million someplace else in town as a placeholder, whether that's refurbishing existing fields that might exist, or obviously if you need to create additional fields, that could be a bigger number, but we carried $3 million for the sake of that conversation. At the end of the day, those costs were down at the bottom, and they were all within a couple $1 million of each other. And we also did the evaluation matrix, I think, comparing those to impacts during the construction process. We noted that the B1 construction process had, impacts to the kids during school, obviously, because you have to work around the existing school. We had that at yellow. We had the impact to existing fields, which are not necessarily related to the middle school. And from a sports perspective, they are for physical education, but they are school system related for the varsity fields. Obviously, they are permanently displaced. Whether or not you choose to replace them becomes then a decision for the district or the town outside of this project. So based on all of that criteria, the committee had narrowed it down from these 6 to BR2, because that had to be carried for the MSBA. B1, which did not impact the fields, did have disruption to the students during construction, which was known. And then also the Johnson site, and it did not carry forward the B4, B5, or B6.
All right. So Brian, go back to that sheet again, would you please?
Oh. Yep, hold on. You see that?
Yeah. So what we're really doing is we're talking B6 is the one with the fields built down below, right there. Okay, you can. I'm sorry. And then B1 is the one we're considering here. So it's a $7 million swing. That's not chump change. So.
The B6 is the more expensive of the two, according to the preliminary estimates, carrying a placeholder to recreate just partial fields, so recreating one of the fields and recreating a soccer field, not all of the fields that are being displaced.
Okay.
Right. So in that option, Jack, just to clarify, there is a soccer field built at the old location of the Bird site. Up above, that also included that cost.
No,
right?
you answered the question. It's about $6.5 million swing between B1 and B6.
Yep.
So by going with B, okay, you answered the question. Thank you.
I think Jack was mentioning if you take the fields out of it, he wanted to know that cost. So if you take the fields out, that's drops $3 million. I think.
And we also carried cost for replicating the soccer field on site, so that's probably another $1 million or 1.5.
I think the B6 option on the field still ends up being
more money,
a little bit more money by a couple mil.
Right.
My comment, and I'm going to say, I do this for a living. I don't see how the site work on the field is more than digging into a hill and putting all these retaining walls. Very simple. How that's way more. The fields are flat. We're talking about frost walls and that. There's very little digging. But now at the other end, we got to do a lot of digging and a lot of other stuff and a lot of extra parking lots and that. So that was caught my eye, a $2 million difference almost in site stuff. If Brian, I know you guys did it. If someone could send it to me at work, I'd love to take a look at how they come up with that. I don't want to waste everybody's time here, but I'd like to know how they come up with the difference between B1 and B6, that much money on site work. Thank you.
Mark, Boris still has his hand up, and we also have Nancy and David.
Oh, Mr. Senek, if you could, please.
Sure. I've made it pretty abundantly clear that I'm definitely pro fields, but when it comes down to this committee and what we're trying to do here, we're trying to build a school. So if fields need to be sacrificed, so be it. The biggest thing that we need to account for is getting this passed through town at the most effective cost with the best options for our teachers and our students. So to me, this and what Mr. Conroy is saying completely makes sense. From a cost standpoint, how is it that much more? And I believe I raised this question initially. How is it that much more to build on a field if you don't have to worry about building around an existing building, if you don't have to worry about grading, if you don't have to worry about additional digging? It just didn't make sense at any point in time. And initially, my initial vote was to put that. It would have been easily to put it on the fields, but since the cost was so much higher, it didn't make sense to vote for it. Even at that $4 million for replacing the fields, you're still $2 million over than what that B1 site stated. So it didn't make sense to vote for that initially. So if there's additional savings that can be created, I don't know what the numbers would look like, but I think it should be a viable option, especially if I believe this committee has gone away from the Johnson site as a potential option, and now we're at the Bird site. We've decided to use the Bird site. We should take a look at all the options that the Bird site exists and make a decision on what that best solution would be on that Bird site from a cost standpoint. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Senek. Ms. Gallivan.
I'm going to let Mr. Salvatore go first because I know he's got another meeting, and then I'll go. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Salvatore, if you could.
Thank you. Like I said, I'm satisfied that, this is how it transpired in the meetings. But however, I think what happened is because everybody's first choice was Johnson and everybody just thought it was going to Johnson, I don't think we fully, I think it was the discussion of whether or not to put it, the Johnsons, to do the Bird site on the fields versus where it is now. I don't know that got full hearing before this committee because most people were looking that's the second choice that's coming up, and it really, it didn't really, everybody thought it was going to the Johnson site. It is what it is. I don't know, I think at this point, I know these, I don't know what can, if this can change later or not, but I feel like we've gone this far. I guess if the committee is going to put the proposal in as is, that's I think that's probably going to be the wind up of it. But I think just because of the weird situation where Johnson went from everybody's first choice to not being anybody's choice, I think putting on the fields lost a full hearing and full discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Salvatore. Ms. Gallivan, if you could.
Okay, 2 points. One is, when we were voting for the Johnson site, we were narrowing it down to 3 choices that night. And Johnson was something that I felt needed to get considered. But even though I voted for it, it wasn't my first choice. I just felt like we needed to get more information about it. So I think that's the other way of looking at that initial vote when we were going down to 3 choices. The other point that has been made a couple of times is the disruption factor, and to me, that is a really important thing to consider. I have the opportunity of working at a school this year, and it was under construction during the fall. We moved into the new building in January. The new building is now fully occupied, and during the month of middle January to middle February, the building has been demolished. I can tell you, I'm so surprised, but so impressed with how well organized that site was. Honestly, they're taking down the building. It's very, very, very close to the new building. And what you notice sometimes is there's a vibration in your projector. Like, you don't hear noise, you don't see dust. And I'm talking about in the classroom that's right next to where the building's coming down. So I wanted to know that the disruption can be managed. I know obviously not everybody can have that experience, but I got to tell you, it's pretty they have a process that is well done, and it's exciting for the kids. They couldn't wait to get in. They had a bazillion questions. That stuff would happen regardless, but it really has not been a disruption. They managed it very well. That's it.
I have one quick question. Nancy, what school was that?
The Kennedy Middle School in Natick, and encompasses the project management there.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that school. Thank you.
Nancy, I got a question actually.
Sure.
Were you there during the construction phase as well, or just the demo phase?
I was there during the final construction.
Okay.
So,
do you have any sense of the disruption to the existing school?
Wait, I'm not sure I understand the question, Jeff.
Do you have any sense of what, maybe not from you specifically, you weren't there, but from other faculty on what the impact of the existing school was during the construction phase? That's a 36-month phase.
Yes, we went over as a group to visit twice, and the principal at that school used to live in Walpole. We know him well, so we've been in touch with him periodically through it to ask just those questions. And from an administrative point of view, he was at a meeting every single week during the school day. He was at meetings very regularly at night. So from an administrator point of view, he told us you've got to be prepared to have your administrators ready to be giving a lot of extra time to the project. But in terms of the disruption, he had very positive things to say also about the way the project was managed. With changing the routes to where parents would drop off and where the buses were, because it changes as you progress through the project. But the feedback from the staff, but especially from the principal, is very positive as the construction was going on.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Mr. Jarvis, do you want to take over here now?
Sure. So, getting back to
Brian, I got one quick comment before you go. Nancy, I hope you have Andy's. I assume it's Andy who's the principal, right?
It is.
All right. So then he's gonna have to be your leader when you talk about disruption. So just get him prepped, get him ready.
I think honestly he's been very accessible to us on every educational question that we have along the way, and yeah, I will make that request this week.
One more, Nancy, if I may. The current assessment of the impact to existing school during demo and construction for the B1 site is neutral. You agree with that?
Yes, I do. I really do.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Fisher, if I could add, I know you would be back on comments that I made in some weeks past. It's important to realize as well that this isn't an addition where hallways in the existing bird are going to be closed off and workers are going to be in the building. That sort of thing is a serious disruption to a school. Building next door, I think, is a disruption in terms of kids looking out the window and seeing what's going on. But there are no work and getting in and out of the school grounds in the morning and the afternoon. But in terms of the school day, it's more interesting, I think, to the kids than anything.
Or a distraction.
Yeah, I think Jeff, the way that we had that on the chart without it in front of me was we had the building on the site close to Bird is kind of in the middle. It's not the best, it's not the worst. We had obviously renovation being the biggest impact, or even a phased project where the kids are in and out of two different buildings, maybe below average. And then we had obviously like Johnson is, obviously there's no impact there. So I think that's what we were trying to capture with that.
I just thought it was important to get the perspective of Nancy, who's actually been through it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jarvis, again, if you could.
Yep. So continuing with the B1 option, so part of the PSR submission is to just provide the updated breakdown of the total project budget. This goes into the MSBA. There's also work that we're doing with the town regarding other potential capital projects that are ongoing and talking about the town's funding process and town meeting process, et cetera. So the B1 option, updated estimates 120.5 million, the breakdown between, again, rough estimate breakdowns of building construction, site construction, including demo, abatement, phasing, et cetera, is at 14.6. All soft costs, assuming 30% on top of the construction cost, which includes the owner's contingencies, roughly 21 million for non-construction related fees and other costs, and then including furniture and technology for in the building, and then contingencies on top of that for a total project budget of roughly 120.5 million. Next slide. And just another update.
Brian,
sorry. Yep.
Would you go back? Did you say that included in the site costs of the owner's reserve?
No, the owner's reserve and the contingencies, Jack. The $6.3 million number. So
the 6.3 is that's basically the total reserves on the project?
Correct. That's 5% at this point.
Okay. Thank you.
An update on the model school program. I know that the committee's possibly talked about this way back in the beginning of the project. And it was something that the working group had discussed in the fall of whether or not a model school could possibly work for this particular project. We reached out to the MSBA for some additional information regarding their middle school projects. It took a while getting back to us. They kind of had some issues with their process as far as getting that information back to us. We did meet with them, the working group, the district, TAP A. We met with them last week and got a presentation from the MSBA regarding two possible middle schools. That would potentially be an option for Walpole if that was the direction. One being a middle school in Lynn and one being a middle school in Shrewsbury. And basically, the way that the process works with the MSBA is once the town and the district go through the feasibility phase and get to the consensus that a new building is the preferred schematic for the preferred solution for the project, then obviously a model school would come into play. They don't have a model renovation or an ad renovation. It's something, if the district feels that it would be a benefit to them, it's something they could look at. You would make a request into the MSBA, basically runs a parallel track in the next few weeks. They would look at our submitted plan and look at it compared to the other schools that are the two models, being Lynn and Shrewsbury, and see if it would make sense that could possibly be modified in a way that could work for the town of Walpole. The thinking is that you could possibly save some additional costs there. However, it's not really proven that the model school saves any money. The only thing that can be quantified is they lower the caps on the design fee and the OPM fee, thinking that you just simply reuse the plans from those and there's not as much fee there. However, what ends up happening is if you have a particular site or you're putting it in a certain spot and you have to manipulate the building to fit program or to fit a site or something like that, then you start modifying that design to make the model fit. You're incurring design fees, but they've already capped your design fees. You end up having them not being reimbursed. The other item that's new to the model school program. This is a program that's been around for almost 12 years now or so. The MSBA has eliminated, they used to give you 5 additional reimbursement points to pursue the model. They've gotten rid of that. So they've really gotten rid of the incentive for districts to do it. So basically they're asking a district to take their education plan of what they think they need in a school to deliver in their district and then fit it into some other district school, modify it as much as possible, but then basically stay within the constraints of what that building is. So you end up losing the incentive points, and you might not necessarily save anything depending on some of the situations with how your program lays out, how your site lays out, etc. It also delays the project slightly, where if you decide to go down the model school program after meeting with the MSBA at the facilities assessment, you basically have to stop, re-interview architects that do the model school, re-interview TAP A, and then decide what to do. And if you end up sticking with your current path, you've basically lost 6 to 8 weeks. So from our perspective, a lot has not happened in the model school world since they kind of revamped this program. They are starting to put a little bit more attention to it, but from our perspective, it doesn't really seem like it's going to bear fruit for Walpole. We looked into it on this project and a couple other projects. In the last 5 years, only 4 districts have actually pursued the model school to the point of getting to the interview with the facilities department at the MSBA. Only 1 has decided to move forward with it. That was the Marlboro project, which they did a presentation on back in November. And the other 3 either did not submit a request or actually declined to go with the model school after meeting with the MSBA. We bring it up simply because it's the point in the process where we would do that. The district and everyone reviewed the two schools, Lynn and Shrewsbury, on that interview with the MSBA. They can speak for themselves, but our opinion is that it's not a good match. If we do want to go down that road, we'd have to make a request to the MSBA by next week. And at that point, basically, they would review our submittal and give us feedback at the March 10th or whenever we have the facilities meeting with them at some point in March. And then we'd make that decision. But we want to bring that to your attention because there is information out there, some perception that, it can be this huge savings for districts. We haven't found that to be true. I think a lot of other districts have not found that to be true at this point, but we wanted to bring that to your attention. We'll answer any questions that you have about that. Antonio, if there's another slide after that.
Yeah, there is. Jeff had his hand up, but I think he might have answered his question.
Yeah, I took it down. The question was really, as far as Lynn and Shrewsbury, were the model schools that we were looking at, were they the same, student population, or?
Lynn is probably the closest. Shrewsbury was actually similar student population, but the Shrewsbury school is actually a 5-6 middle school. So, when looking at it, it's a glorified elementary school, not a middle school. And it was about 40,000 square feet smaller than what we currently have. So you basically have to expand that model, roughly 40,000 square feet to kind of get to what you're talking about with Walpole. Lynn was about the same population, maybe slightly smaller. But again, a very different educational program. They had a lot of life skills and voc tech type classrooms and things in that school. So again, it's not necessarily apples to apples when you look at it. It's just, it becomes a route that you might want to take if you don't, I guess if you make that decision early on, that's what you want to do. It makes sense. But at this point, you're basically trying to fit your program into another town's school.
You have any sense of what the cost savings to Marlboro were?
Well, Marlboro, when they looked into it, was actually a little skewed because the information that we had was that they had their preliminary estimate. They actually had the building on a different site, and then they decided to go with the model school and change the location of the building, which actually dropped a lot of their site development costs that they needed to do related to that particular site due to some wetlands. So they had a $2 million savings related to site work, which doesn't translate to the model building savings. So there was a $2 million savings on Marlboro. There was some savings to the designer fee to some extent, but I don't have a total savings. It wasn't as if you were saving, $10-20 million on the building itself.
1 or 2%, something like that, maybe.
I don't remember the value of the Marlboro was an elementary school as well, I believe. It wasn't a middle school.
Thanks.
Mr. Fisher, if I could add, long story short, there haven't been model schools. Marlboro really is the only one in quite a while. The program seemed to have died, so it's hard for us to kind of get a grip.
Yeah,
how
to elaborate on that, the MSBA actually kind of took a hiatus from model schools after they first came out because they weren't necessarily realizing some of the savings that they thought they were going to see. So they kind of took a break from it. They've updated some of their models and they're trying to revamp that to some extent. But to Mark's point, there's not been a whole lot of examples out there to really get a sense of what you can quantify. And like right now, the only thing we can quantify would be any changes to design fees or OPM fees. And Tony, do you want to go through timeline? Or what else do you have there?
No, I think this is the point where there's either discussion or move to go for a B1 option for submitting to for PSR, but I can go through, this is where we are right now. Tomorrow's kind of the deadline for submitting PSR to stay on the current schedule. The next phase, this pretty much ends, if we submit PSR, this pretty much ends feasibility study phase, and we'll be entering into a new phase, which is schematic design. Our original plan is obviously to get to a point in the summer and submit. Biggest part of this phase is to develop the drawings to a point where we have a really good cost estimate so that we can get into an agreement with the MSBA, a project budget and funding agreement. So this is pretty much the biggest amount of work to do before we enter that agreement. There's quite a few drawings, and like I said, these all result in two cost estimates, one that Compass does and one that TAP A does, and then they get reconciled. We're trying to stay on track by submitting by July instead of August, again, to make MSBA board meeting dates, and that doesn't mean that we have to wait until the comments come back to get going. You know, we outlined some of the things that we would be working on in March, which would entail talking about tightening up square footages and getting the balance of the minutes in. So so we could get right to work if the committee sees fit. That's pretty much it for the presentation. We do have some admin items, like when the next meeting and coordinating with the select board. But I think at this point we should probably go back to this and entertain either more discussion from the committee or feelings about getting this thing submitted.
Yeah, so the goal for tonight would be to, if we move forward with the PSR B1 option, that gets submitted to the MSBA, we would go in front of their facilities assessment committee in March. They have two possible dates, March 10th and March 24th. They would also return comments related to the PSR submission that we respond to in schematic design. And the goal is pushing that all forward to get to a point where we have an updated cost estimate or two cost estimates reconciled early summer, that we can get that schematic design put together and then enter into the project funding agreement stage with the MSBA ahead of town meeting, and obviously get out with enough public presence, you know, after the return of summer in late August, September, and October ahead of town meeting to get all information out publicly.
So, to clarify, Mr. Jarvis, we're not locking into a square footage here with preferred schematic, correct? We're in a position where we can sharpen our pencils a little bit more, to use that phrase.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier to go smaller. Obviously, you're not going to be able to, you know, you're not necessarily want to come back to the MSBA and say we want to add on an extra gym after this point. But if we're tightening up square footage of certain spaces and making those hard decisions in the next couple weeks, yes, we can, and that is the goal. I mean, the overall goal is to get this project as efficient as possible from a reimbursement perspective, average square foot cost, et cetera, both to present to town meeting, also from an MSBA support perspective, and then get that information estimated so that when we go to town meeting, we know that, you know, we have a very efficient building that is in line with middle schools in the state, that's in line with the MSBA, that's maximizing the reimbursement to the town based upon what the town feels is important to have in this building. And then we can present all that to town meeting and let town meeting decide.
Thank you, Mr. Jarvis. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Jack, Fisher does have his hand up.
All right, Mr. Fisher, if you could, please.
Yeah, this is, hold on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I admit that I have not had a chance because we were pressed for time on the draft PSR that you sent out. But in looking at it, I'm a little confused. We have the table up there where we did the ratings for the three sites, Johnson, Bird, and then the Bird rental. But as I go through this, that chart is there, that table is there. But then throughout it, after that table's there, you're discussing only 3 Bird sites. And I don't quite understand. I may just, in my quick review of it, I may have missed something. But I think you need to take a hard look and make sure that it's very clear. I thought what you were going to do was basically make the case for B1 relative to the Bird addition renovation and relative to the Johnson site. But it looks like you're comparing 3 different options for Bird, one of which is B1. So I'm just going to ask you to carefully go through this and make sure that it's very clear what you're trying to do, because it's confusing and it's not consistent the way I look at it right now. And again, it may have been I just looked at it too quickly with the time that we had, but I'm just going to ask you to take a look at that. The second thing, Brian, is a question is, as you're going through this and sharpening your pencils and fine tuning this and so forth like that, how much latitude does the state give us in terms of fine tuning, reducing, changing from where we are right now to where you come up with a final schematic design?
They're going to lock us in at schematic design, Jack. So by the time we get to schematic design is when we start entering the funding agreement. So they're going to finalize a project budget based on all the square footage and the costs in the project. And then they'll lock in the reimbursement rate. So by the time we get to town meeting, we'll have that funding agreement, a budget, a scope and budget, a funding agreement, and a reimbursement rate.
Jack, from now until then, from now until schematic, there can be tightening up, there can be some small moves here and there, but say we decided to like flip-flop the gym or come up with a significantly different floor plan, they might, ask questions, because after we submit this, like Brian said, during the month of March, it goes to their facilities assessment subcommittee, and they kind of look at it with a more trained eye than some of the other staff who might be looking at ed programs specifically or some of the admin items. So they kind of give a pretty good overview and ask specific questions related to that. So we can't come back in schematic design and move the building closer to Washington or do significant.
Correct. Yeah, we're not flip-flopping the building or sites. It's tightening up the current option that we have.
Okay, thank you.
They'll likely encourage us to look critically at the space.
Yep.
To make reductions.
I have a comment. I can't see me, but I do have comments.
Mr. Conroy.
So this system or new way of doing business with the state is completely different than the old way, because the old way we're getting 63%, and the more you could cut down on it, the better off you were. So we never had something that said, this is it. We have to have 2,000 square feet for this room or anything. They just looked at it in totality. So we don't have that. If I understand is, we don't have that option anymore. Is that correct?
Correct. They dictate the spaces of the building, quantities and square footage, etc., based on those space summary templates.
So there is you can't go back and say we don't need this or something to cut down the price. So what we fly with is
you can do that.
What?
You can make changes from now to schematic on tightening up.
Yeah. I understand schematic, but once you go beyond schematic, if you have a problem with the money to be appropriated, people are going to say, well, we got to cut something out. You're locked in. So you're flying with this, correct?
Well, but you can, Jack, if you have to do value engineering because of a budget problem in design development or construction documents, you can always go back to them and say, this is what we're doing to control the budget. They want the budget controlled.
No, I understand the budget. You take drywall and knock it down to 3/8, for instance. I'm just making a number. But you're not able to change your whole footprint or layout or whatever. What you've submitted is, you said what you need, and they're not gonna retract from that. So you couldn't take an auditorium, excuse me, at 6,000, 600 seats and knock it down to 300. Is that correct?
Well, we could do that now through schematic design.
No, I understand now, but
So after schematic design, you can still, if the decision is, it would just be very disruptive to the design.
Okay. So basically, what I'm trying to point out to everybody is, you gotta fly, once this has gone through schematic with the state, we don't have the options like we did for the last 30 years of getting it under budget. Once it's in the schematic, we're pretty much locked. That's what I wanna point out to everybody. And the other question, Brian, you keep mentioning town meeting. I didn't see anything on there for the town meeting vote, though, on your chart. When is that occurring?
Yeah, I think we're coordinating that for post-town meeting, so possibly the 26th or after.
Of what, October?
We have town meeting ballot vote there as kind of one item at this point, but they're gonna be obviously two separate things.
Yeah, the two separate. The question I have is, what is the time frame that if either town meeting or say the town turns it down, I think you said that way back, is there a time limit between how much time you can go back and get a positive? Before this, you have to hit the restart button?
Yeah, I think we talked about was it 30 days, 45 days to some extent, that you could possibly, circle the wagons and take another vote. But at that point, you don't have the time to then come with obviously a different design or something. You can make minor tweaks to numbers.
No, I understand. So like I'm saying, once you locked in the schematics and this and that, so you got 30 to 45 day window. And I think if I understand you right, Brian, you said we go back to the bottom of the list. Is that how it goes?
You have to resubmit your statement of interest. They'll close the project and you basically resubmit to the MSBA.
All right. So if it's not a positive vote, trying to say that you got to get going, and if not, you go to the back of the bus again, right?
Yeah, you resubmit.
You have to actually go and meet with them and propose a possible, how you plan on getting a positive vote. If if they believe you have a good plan, they have some discretion to allow it, but it's 120 days from the board vote, which the board vote we're now looking at is what, August, I think?
Yeah, possibly August, maybe October.
It's either August or October. You have 120 days at that point to get the successful town vote.
Oh, the state board, you mean?
Yeah, MSBA's board.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure. There's a lot of boards. Just want to make sure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conroy. Ms. Gaositz, I believe you wanted to speak.
Jen has her hand up.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, that's me. I had a question on some of the spaces and where in the process the MSBA can approve them if they decide that they fit into the educational plan. I'm only asking because when we toured some of the schools, there were some, spaces that I'll call outside of the box thinking. For instance, like Hull had a yoga room and they managed to write it up into their ed plan in such a way that the yoga room, even though it's not typically approved by the MSBA, they pushed the envelope and got it approved. So, and I believe there was another school that did a little bit of that with some of their music rooms, a school we toured. So I just wanted to know how that gets considered, because if you cut all the spaces, and tweak them and the MSBA doesn't even look at it, how does that work into the process?
So they make their final decisions on eligible spaces as part of that schematic design report in July. So the final, after that gets submitted, there's something called a project scope and budget agreement conference, and that is when we kind of have the final. Now, in between that, there's a lot of conversation with them, and if they have any questions and we have a chance to sort of, pitch the different spaces that might exceed the template. For instance, in core academic, we have some pretty good arguments on some of them. But that final decision on what's eligible happens probably on this project sometime in August.
Okay, I just wanted to say that I don't think we should cut things out too soon without pitching them. If we have a good reason for doing certain things, like, you know, I don't think we should move to a cafetorium if we really dislike that, just because it's going to save us space. We may not get reimbursed for everything, but, you know, just creative ways to try to get some of the space. Like you said, if there's arguments, I would try to advance that and see what we can get approved.
Just there are some things that are categorically ineligible, and that an auditorium,
right?
Categorically ineligible.
Yeah.
Right.
Listen to an argument.
So Jen, part of our process in scheduling the next meeting with the committee is coming back kind of with that list of here are the items that, you know, per the ed plan or per the town or per the district, you know, maybe with a different level of risk of possibly being deemed ineligible, and then having the committee decide, you know, we prefer the auditorium, we understand it's ineligible, you know, versus a cafetorium or whatever that might be. But those are the conversations that, you know, as we move forward, is we're trying to get the building as efficient as possible while we meet the ed program and meet the needs of the town. Because just like every town, Walpole has some unique, you know, requirements for their program, requirements for the building, that other towns might not have, or it might not be as high a priority in other towns, and vice versa. So between now and kind of putting together that schematic design is when those decisions and priorities are going to need to be made, and then the committee's going to need to understand that, you know, you're moving forward with a project that may or may not have some elements that are ineligible for reimbursement categorically, or you're over the square footage and certain amount of square footage is eligible, but it's important to the town, and you move forward with that. And, you know, a lot of schools do that, and some schools are tighter than others, but I think at the end we're going to be really close to where we need to be, but that's the next couple steps.
That's helpful to know, because I know, like, the central kitchen and stuff, I'd like to hear the rationale, because there may be money saved down the line by doing something a certain way. So I just wanted to kind of figure out where that all fell into the process. So that was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gaositz. So, not to push us along too quickly, but given that we now know that we have latitude to tweak this over the next couple of weeks, unless anybody wants to discuss further, do we have a motion to submit the preferred schematic report to the MSBA?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Gaositz, a second by, I'm not sure who made that second.
Ms. Lawson.
Ms. Lawson, a motion by Ms. Gaositz, a second by Ms. Lawson. So I'm going to poll the committee. Mr. Friscia?
Yes.
Mr. Salvatore, I don't believe is with us anymore.
Yes, I am actually.
Oh, he is. Thank you, Mr. Salvatore. Your vote?
Yes.
Very good, thank you. Ms. Lawson?
Yes.
Ms. Gallivan?
Yes, and I would just like to say this is so exciting to think about for the kids, and thank you for the questions are good ones. Just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gaositz?
Yes.
Dr. Goff?
Yes.
Mr. Anderson? Mr. Anderson? Very good, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Conroy?
I understand.
Thank you. Mr. Jeffrey Fisher?
Mark, I raised my hand before the motion was made.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't see anything on the screen. Would you like to make a comment, Mr. Fisher?
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm in favor of pushing the PSR forward, except with respect to slide 63, impact to traffic for the B1 site. I did want to ask Mr. Bonfatti what the preliminary traffic report stated, and I do not believe that submitting the impact to traffic as good for the B1 site versus Johnson as fair is accurate.
So noted, Mr. Fisher. Thank you. Mr. Jack Fisher?
Same.
Thank you. Mr. Connor?
It's not an abstention.
I'm sorry, Mr. Fisher?
That's not an abstention.
What is not? I'm sorry. I misunderstood you.
Capture for a vote for me, Mark.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you just then.
What did you capture for a vote for me?
I'm not certain, to be honest. How did you vote? Would you like to repeat it?
Let's get this straight.
Again, I raised my hand before the motion was made. After the motion was made, it wasn't brought up for additional discussion.
I didn't see your hand, Mr. Fisher, so I'm not certain how we proceed from here then, as a parliamentary issue.
We can open it up for discussion and then revote.
Revote, yeah.
Okay, very good. So we will open it up to discussion. Would you like to elaborate on your comments, Mr. Fisher?
I would like to see if Mr. Bonfatti has any initial.
I'm gonna leave this meeting, actually. I'm gonna
traffic report.
Thank you, Mr. Salvatore.
I think Charlie spoke to that, Jeff.
You spoke to it briefly, but you didn't get into any detail on, you know.
I mean, I didn't, I guess what I'm saying is I didn't read it yet because it just came in. I think Charlie is the one who commented on it earlier. I think, Charlie, do you want to comment further on that? Did you hear his comments earlier?
I don't. Well, my only comment that I would say again is that I would recommend that the traffic engineer have the opportunity to present to the committee.
We have to provide a rating for the B1 site for impact to traffic.
So,
Yes.
so we don't technically need to submit a matrix to the MSBA at all. The matrix is a tool that's used by the OPM and to evaluate merit of sites, but it is not. There is no requirement for it. So if it is possible to either eliminate it from the PSR submission or alternatively just eliminate that column in its entirety, so with the idea that it's still in progress, in process. So in other words, there's no formal MSBA requirement for any particular category relative to the PSR. So you could just leave that out and say, this is something we're studying further.
Correct.
Any further questions, Mr. Fisher?
I have a comment.
Yes, Mr. Jack Fisher.
I'm troubled by this. I mean, that matrix was basically our Bible, and we argued and debated and discussed all of those items at length over the last 2 or 3 meetings, and then to say, here's a key one that we're just gonna not bother to consider because we got the information late. So it seems to me that what we're doing is we're pushing a decision on the PSR when we still are gathering information on the acceptability of certain elements for the different sites. And I'm troubled by that because that is inconsistent with what we've done in the past. And I know we had this discussion the last time around, and I asked Brian this question very specifically: what would be the impact of delaying submission of the PSR? And I think what I heard was it was going to 1 month delay in submitting the PSR was going to result in a 4-month delay in getting the construction started. Well, this is an important item, and I think it needs to be carefully considered. And I think that's one of the points that Jeff has been making, is that we need to consider this. Jack has made the same comment, and other people have made the same comment too about the traffic. So I would recommend, even though I don't like it, and I'm sure there are going to be other people that don't like it, delaying the PSR until we can fully assess what the traffic impact is.
So just to clarify, so is the question related to the traffic impact? Because the traffic study is studying the Bird site. So it's studying 6 intersections around the Bird site, regardless of what the option is at the Bird site. And then the traffic study will get into more detail related to the preferred option as we move through schematic design, as far as what might need to happen with traffic mitigation, both on-site and off-site. Is it a question of whether or not the traffic would have changed to the vote to go Johnson or Bird? Because to me, I think the traffic study right now is just generally related to the Bird site, and it's a preliminary one that'll be more detailed as we move through schematic. So we can change it on the evaluation and say, you know, B1's traffic could be a yellow, but does that change the vote versus add Reno, B1 or Johnson? I mean, I don't know if we're going backwards for that.
I don't agree whether we should hold up the PSR, but I do think that we should level set on what the impact of traffic is for the B1 site, whether the current good criteria rating is sufficient based on the arguments that have been made I've understood that there's been additional discussion with public safety over concerns about the pick for the B1 site. And honestly, I think the rating is fair to even poor. And to submit with this comparison chart showing, what it is now.
Yeah, so I understand what you're saying, Jeff. So I think when we did the evaluation matrix and we had it as a good, not a best, so we had it at light green. And the thinking is that knowing that whatever site we picked, you were going to introduce half of the town's population to that site that currently doesn't go there. And the thinking was that any of the bird sites that you picked would have the advantage over a Johnson site of being able to create a secondary means of access to the site for like a dedicated bus loop, which would hopefully help with some of that traffic. So we rated all of the potential bird sites the same as a good, not the best, and we rated the Johnson site as one notch lower because of not having the presumed ability to be able to create a secondary entrance.
Right,
so we could rate
only one way in and out.
We could rate the bird sites all lower, but we didn't necessarily get into the individual. Like for instance, we didn't get into the individual traffic of any of the individual options at bird because we had narrowed the bird sites down for different reasons at that time. So we can lower that for record, but as Charlie stated, we don't need to include the matrix as part of this submittal. We typically include it to show that the district did go through a process in evaluating their options.
I think is important.
Right. So
I have a question on the traffic. Mark?
Mr. Conroy, yes. Nancy had her hand up for quite a while, her raised hand in the box.
Well, I've just acknowledged Mr. Conroy, so we can have Mr. Conroy and then Ms. Gallivan.
Okay.
Kind of helps not having a camera sometimes.
Yeah.
Brian, question.
Yep.
It was your traffic consultant that did this?
No, it was through TAPA's traffic consultant.
Oh, and the traffic consultant has already performed this over the last couple of weeks?
The preliminary study, yes.
Yeah, preliminary study, yes. They haven't done, obviously with COVID and stuff, they haven't done official counts, but they're doing preliminary study with historical information they received from the town, what they could receive from.
Okay, that's exactly where I'm going.
But I am finished. So they did with what they received from the town on current projects. They received some historical data from the town on other projects, and then also I believe they did projections based on current traffic and historical traffic at both the schools.
Okay, so
they also, Jack, they also spent time with Principal Connor and Assistant Principal O'Leary on site with interviewing about what it usually looks like, not COVID times. We also had a conference call with the town planner about all future developments in Walpole and factoring in potential traffic increases not related to the school.
Okay.
And like Brian said, this is just a preliminary study, so this isn't the end all be all. This is just to illustrate that probably some mitigation would have to be done.
Yeah, and the preliminary takeaway is, as I think Charlie had mentioned earlier, is that you're going to have impact to already stressed intersections in the area that are going to need to be addressed in some manner as part of the project, or with however the operations of the school.
Okay, first I want to make a correction. We don't have a town planner, so I'm not sure who you were talking to.
It was the person who is at the Office of Economic and Community Development.
Well, they're not the planner. They have nothing to do with what I do on the planning board. So wherever they get their facts and figures, they have no knowledge of it. So that's an issue with me, okay? And my second issue is, my understanding is most of this traffic study came from Pulte's down at the old woodworkers site. Is that a fair statement?
No, the traffic consultant had access to 4 or 5 reports, not just one, that was provided by the town.
Okay, but I'm not familiar with any of the other reports other than Pulte, who had to do East and High Plain and High Plain and Washington. So what they've done basically is use what already has been submitted to the town by developers. Is that correct?
No, Jack, if I can jump in, we did a traffic study for Poly, Wash, and Short Street right before the pandemic hit. This is part of a capital improvement that was submitted to town meeting in the fall. We're looking at making upgrades to that. So we have real traffic data for that intersection right before COVID hit.
Yeah, that's down at the bottom of the hill. I'm just talking about where it's really impacted, Washington and High Plain and High Plain East. All right, I just want to get the fact, I'm just setting the record straight. And my understanding, it was kind of news to me that you had done a traffic study. One thing I want to interject into all this is we keep hearing about only one way in to the Robbins Road site. Well, I think that's a little misleading. Is the fact that, yes, if you did it at Robbins Road, you'd have one way in for buses and cars. I don't really count buses exiting and entering on East Street as a traffic count, but more importantly is you can only access, based upon, this is just for the record, the new bird site from Washington. So in effect, you only have that one way in. So I just want to make that point too. So it's not apples and oranges. It's very close, both of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conroy. Ms. Gallivan, I believe you wanted to speak as well?
Yeah, I guess it's not going to be a surprise that I'm in favor of moving forward with the PSR. But I think I see the way to do it. I think that Charlie Hayes was saying that we don't need to include the grid at all in this submittal. Am I correct with that?
That's correct.
Okay, so I would suggest that for this submittal, we don't include the grid, and that we, before this becomes like something that sort of grows a life of its own, let's schedule a meeting with the traffic consultant after people have a chance to review the report, but fairly soon, so that we can still move forward, but we can also begin to come to some resolutions on, what potential solutions look like.
So, Ms. Gallivan, do we have a motion of some sort? Could we phrase that as a motion, perhaps?
Sure. I would make a motion to submit the PSR as written with the deletion of the
evaluation matrix.
The evaluation matrix. Thank you, Tony.
Second.
So we have a motion by Ms. Gallivan, a second by Ms. Gayositz. So one more time, I'm going to poll the committee, if I could. Mr. Fisher. Mr. Fisher.
Yes.
Very good. Mr. Salvatore, I'm not certain is still here.
No.
Mr. Salvatore is a no. Ms. Lawson.
Yes.
Ms. Gallivan.
Yes.
Ms. Gayositz.
Yes.
Dr. Goff.
Yes.
Mr. Anderson.
Yeah.
Mr. Conroy.
No.
Mr. Jeffrey Fisher.
No.
Mr. John Fisher.
No.
Mr. Connor.
Yes.
Mr. Hahn.
Yes.
Mr. Senek.
Yes.
Ms. Santiago Taylor.
Yes.
And I vote yes. It is a vote. So what do we have next, Brian?
Wait, point of order.
Yes, Mr. Fisher.
I think you have to complete the vote that we kind of interrupted, or retake it on submitting it.
I believe that's what we did. We had, I guess, a motion in between reconsider. I'm not quite certain how it was phrased. Again, that's where the parliamentary issue comes up, when I can't see people's hands, when Jeff had his hand up and I didn't see it. So we sort of went back to square one on that.
Well, I think the vote on Nancy's motion was to basically, the motion, the decision was that the committee made was whether to include the matrix or not It's not whether the vote was not to whether to submit or not. So I think you need to either continue the vote or probably what would be better, I would suggest, Mark, is just redo the vote on whether we're going to submit.
I heard Nancy say the motion was to submit.
Yeah,
Yes, Jack.
Mary Mortella, do you have the motion that you can read back to us?
It was to submit PSR as written with deletion of the evaluation matrix.
Thanks, Mary.
So, Mr. Fisher, I believe that was the motion that we voted on.
All right.
Thank you. So we do have a vote then to submit the PSR to the MSBA. So again, next we have item 6 to review the timeline and next steps. Mr. Jarvis, and I believe, Jeff, as well, you wanted us to reconsider the 6 o'clock time, if I'm correct. So perhaps we need to speak to that.
6 o'clock time and or day of the week.
Thank you.
And I think last we discussed possibly moving to Wednesdays.
Right.
Yeah, so next was just Tony, we're just trying to schedule the next meeting of this committee, and the goal would be to come back with finalizing, kind of go through the final square footage modifications and an update regarding moving into SD. Any comments back from the MSBA regarding PSR? We might not have any at that point. And then clear understanding of ineligible.
Yeah, day and time is obviously up to the committee. I'm just trying to avoid the dates that you see here, which is March 9th, 23rd, April 6th. These are select board dates, so that David, Patrick, and Jim can be joining us without having to be in 2 meetings at once. So if the committee so chooses to go on a Wednesday, then that conflict goes away. If we decide to keep it on Tuesday, I'm just trying to avoid those Tuesdays. And then again, time is up to the discretion of the committee.
I believe there was a feel for moving it.
Poke in as
Yeah.
trying to monitor 2 meetings at once where important things are going on, and it's hard, and I can't do this. So if we can avoid Tuesdays where there's a board meeting, that would be appreciated. And I'm sure Mr. Johnson would appreciate being especially at these stages as this gets moving on, that he'd be able to come to both meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Salvatore.
And I apologize, I think I had the mic open with the other meeting going on and may have interrupted you guys.
I don't think I heard you, Mr. Salvatore, but thank you. So do we want to consider moving to Wednesdays?
Is this the motion, Mark?
Yes, Mr. Fisher.
Is this a motion we're making?
I'm just asking for any conversation. Thank you.
I'd suggest Wednesdays at 7.
Okay, so you want to make that a motion, Mr. Fisher?
Make a motion to
Sorry, if I can just
future
jump in
meetings to
real quick.
Wednesdays
Hold on
at
a
7.
second. Which Wednesdays? I'm on a board of another organization, so it depends on which Wednesdays.
I mean, we can send out a. We can send out a doodle poll to the committee and have people check their availability and see when we have a quorum. I mean, that's how we handle it a lot of times on these committees, unless you want to check your calendars now.
Yeah, Brian, I was going to suggest the same thing. Just there's, 15 committee members, and between Compass, SAPE, school administration, town administration, it's going to be difficult to just try to do this with all of us on the Zoom. So if we could set out a Zoom and everybody kind of check off, days of the week, which weeks you're available through the month, I think that'll be really helpful.
Yeah, we can do that.
So our goal would be
as far as other board meetings on Wednesdays, it's just really ZBA, right?
I believe so, but I'm not certain 100% of the time. I also don't know what TAPE and Compass's availability is like, or the school departments. So, yeah, to answer your question, Jeff, I think it's just ZBA, but there's a lot of parties here. So
looking at the March week, so the week of the March 8th and the week of the 15th, the 9th and the 16th are out because of the 9th is out because of the select board.
Correct.
Do we want to do a poll for the 10th or the 11th, and then our Monday nights out for any reason?
School committee on the 11th. So,
All right, so the 10th. What about Monday nights?
no.
Finance committee.
Yeah.
We got FinCom.
The doodle thing where we all can give our, I don't have my calendar here. I mean, I'd like to be able to consider the dates that are being put forth.
So we can send out a couple dates with a couple different times on those dates. I mean, to be quite honest with you, there's a lot of times we do these committee meetings and unfortunately not everyone is there because they're all in different meetings as well. So we'll send out a couple different dates for those 2 weeks in March with a couple different times on each date, and we'll see when we have quorums.
So, Mr. Fisher, you've made a motion. Would you like to withdraw that pending the doodle poll?
Yeah, I'll withdraw that.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Mr. Jarvis?
I think that's all we had, right?
That is all we have.
All right, very good.
For the doodle poll, it only works if everybody responds. So I just encourage you when you get it to just pick your favorite and then send it along.
Pick what works and we'll find out what we have quorums for.
And just a question, are you putting a doodle poll out for all future meetings or just the next meeting?
Just what we're doing in March. The next 2 meetings in March, because it tends to move month to month.
Thank you, Mr. Jarvis.
I have one question, Mark.
Yes, Mr. Conroy.
Brian, do you have a list of meetings you need us for the next umpteen months?
As far as what the dates are?
Yeah, I mean, you can always wiggle a meeting here or there. If I knew it was going to be every other week, that's a whole different than if like, oh, we don't need you till May or something like that.
Yeah, we can work that out. I mean, moving forward, I mean, my thought is we might definitely monthly at a minimum. And possibility as we get to design it, twice a month. I don't know if we established the third. Did we establish the third Tuesday of every month previously?
Well, one other thing, Brian, I want to suggest is, yeah, I know you would like to review the stuff and not an issue, but if you need a specific vote or a specific review, if you could highlight that, those are the ones that, yeah, I don't think I can make it this week, but I'll definitely make sure I'm there for the next one.
Yeah, we can do that. We have that scheduled.
Okay, that would be good, because we all can move things around for something real important. If we're just going to talk about the ropes in the gym, we don't all have to be there for that.
Thank you, Mr. Conroy.
Oh, I think you need to be there for that.
Yeah, I'm going to tie everybody up.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Very good. We have a motion from Mr. Fisher. Is that correct? Do we have a second?
Yes.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second by Mr. Jack Fisher. I'm going to poll the committee. Mr. Fisher.
Yes.
Mr. Salvatore.
Aye.
Ms. Lawson.
Yes.
Ms. Gallivan.
Yes.
Ms. Gaositz.
Yes.
Dr. Goff.
Yes.
Mr. Anderson.
Yeah.
Mr. Conroy.
Yes.
Mr. Jeffrey Fisher.
Yes.
Mr. John Fisher.
Yes.
Mr. Connor.
Yes.
Mr. Hahn.
Yes.
Mr. Senek.
Yes.
Ms. Santiago Taylor.
Yes.
And I vote yes. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Safe.
Good night.
Thanks.